Great. Well, it was a wonderful first session, a great way to start off the conference here. And now we'll just go straight into panel 2. I'd like to invite Funmi Arewa to come up. Funmi is a professor of law here at UC Irvine and also has an appointment in the anthropology department. And her work is on copyright law in the entertainment industry, law and technology, law and society, and business, and with a special focus on business and copyright protections and things like music piracy in Africa. So Funmi will be chairing the session, and I'll invite you up, and then you can take the cards.
Hello. We are going to first hear from Divine Fu, who's going to talk to us about mobility ICTs and mobile money usages and practices among poor rural farmers in Cameroon. So thank you.
Good morning. Thank you. I thought of many ways to start this presentation, but I didn't know until a few minutes ago when I received a text from my friend Francis, who couldn't make it here, who said that I should start it by talking about our own stories. We've been moving back and forth, trying to understand how we can insert ourselves into a project which is also about us. My grandmother was a farmer, as many people who grew up in a rural area like myself. She grew up cultivating a whole host of other things. Maize, corn, cassava, and lots of things, because you know you need to cultivate so many crops in order to find a way to survive and also to eat. During the holidays, my mom would send us to visit her so we could also help and support her in her farm. And usually this was a very collective activity because it involved lots of friends, lots of colleagues, neighbors, and it also involved a lot of borrowing, because we had to borrow hoes and borrow machetes. Nobody ever had the complete package of tools that you needed to cultivate. The harvest seasons were a very difficult time for us, because during this time we spend a lot of time in the field, and we have to harvest crops and walk for very long distances. So there was very little transport during that time. Not like today, where you can stand by the roadside and call for a motorbike to come pick you up. But my grandmom, she used to translate these crops into foodstuff, which she would sell. And she used to cook it, carry it on her head, and walk from one door to the other, to sell this foodstuff. Through that money, she was able to send me to the university. And when I had a chance to travel abroad, one of the first things I did was to buy her a mobile phone, because I thought that it was going to facilitate her life. It was going to help her perhaps to have customers and not just walk from one place to the other as she used to do. It was also going to give me access to her to try to find out her problems when she had any problems. But unfortunately, she was never literate, never went to school. She had very bad eyesight, so she really couldn't use this cell phone very well. But she kept it at home. It became a symbol of our relationship. And also, many other people, neighbors, friends, and cousins, they took advantage of this cell phone to also call for their businesses, but also to exploit me, because they had to call me to ask for money for all sorts of things. And even though I was away, I became a kind of wallet on legs for them. So, several years down the way, my mom also became a farmer as a teacher, but she began to trade, and she began to cultivate maize and would trade. But she started doing this at a time when mobile phones then had become very popular. And also when money transfer services, had become very popular amongst people. So it changed it completely changed the way in which she began to do things. She began to train very different from her mother, but continued to perhaps maintain the same practices and relationships which her mother used to do. So this study for us is about these kinds of things. It's about these kinds of people and these kinds of relationships. It is shaped by a number of issues. One, there are two interests from me. I'm particularly interested in questions of agency, on precarity, sustainability, and resilience. And also from Francis Nyamjo, who has been doing work on interdependency, mobility, ICTs, and conviviality. It says that agency in Africa as independence or dependence, but interdependence and intersubjectivity amongst people. So our focus is on how individuals sustain life as agents through relationships with others, how communities as corporate bodies articulate and defend collective or group interests in the world of hegemonies, and how the quest for individual fulfillment negotiates conviviality with collective interests. So we're particularly interested in how, on the place of mobile money in this process, that is how people use mobile money to negotiate this conviviality. So, this is a group, the Tambak Brothers Development Common Initiative Group. They are based in one of the impoverished communities in Bamenda, which is the capital of the northwest province of Cameroon, which is also a town in the Cameroon grass fields. These young people are particularly interesting for me. I've been doing research on them since 2006 on a host of other things, with agriculture currently and mobility being one of my very interesting or important issues. But this group of young men usually meet for convivial activities. So they will usually meet to have parties and to, especially on Sundays, on Saturdays, they will usually have soccer or football. But amongst the activities, one of the things they do is to put together resources, to help different people in the community. And one of the main activities they do is to sponsor underprivileged children within that community, Old Town, where they all come from, to school. Because since most of them are unemployed and most of them also grow up without the opportunity to go to school, they thought that they should put together their resources to send children to school. But of course they don't have money, so they have to look for other ways of raising money. And one of these is agriculture. Recently they acquired a farm where during the weekends they will normally plant crops and other stuff, and then also harvest and trade this in the food market, which is one of the popular spots in the Bamenda, where farmers, both men and women, come to trade different crops. But they mainly put together this money, mainly do this cultivation, so they should be able to improve upon their communities. So they put together this in a kind of association which they call Njangi groups. Others call it tontines, and I think in West Africa we have seen this called Rokari, and other groups or so. So in order to accomplish their tasks, there is a whole network of interdependency, within this. It involves both their farming and their interaction with different farmers. It involves transportation to different places, sales in the market, as well as negotiation with police officers, and also consumption. So this project tries to look at the relationships, across these different spheres. What happens to electronic transfer and mobile money within these spheres, and also how these very young men and other farmers within this community use it to continue to build different kinds of interdependent relationships, and how they use it, to build different bundles of relationships within that community. We build on this notion of Njangi, which comes from the Cameroon grass fields, and as I have mentioned, you've seen it elsewhere. where individuals and communities have a long history of investing in networks of solidarity and also avenues of accumulation which bypass the state, and the different state encumbrances and even sometimes benefit use the same networks to benefit from the state. Such networks usually require that they should pull together different financial resources, both by individuals and different collectivities, in order to fulfill different needs. And these associations or this practice usually happens during times of prosperity and also during times of precarity. Of course, I'm particularly interested in times of precarity. So in the grass field, it's known as Njangi, which is this thrift and loan. And of course, in French, it's called tontine. But it's particularly meant to facilitate survival and also success of groups within difficult times. This has become particularly popular after the 1980s following the economic crisis. But we refer to Njangi as a game. It's a game of solidarity and it's a game of mutuality. And it's a game which involves both friends and also family, but it's a game also of very close people of close proximity. But it involves very strong communal ties, also as internalization of values that emphasize honesty, interdependence, and conviviality. So it emphasizes a lot of trust and also a lot of reciprocity, which is the name of the game, as people mainly bank on others, because others become some kind of bank where they can bank trust and different kinds of relationship. And as we say back home, it's about scratching backs, that you scratch my back and I scratch your back for reciprocity. But participating members are usually expected to embody and reproduce this trust in this Njangi ethic, because usually these groups are constituted through so many years of relationships with a whole host of different people within that group. We emphasize that Njangis are more than just banks, more than just places where people really invest money, because they bring together different acquaintances in contexts such as workplaces, churches, colleges, businesses, and so forth. And Njangi is also more than just money, because Njangis are expected to create and also ensure for the continuity of different social networks. But Njangis also provide opportunities for people to support each other, like during events and also during work and during appointments, during baptisms and funerals. Members of these groups, of Njangi groups, are expected to support and help each other through. So, our work then tries to use this to look at it within a different context, because we are trying to respond to calls for epistemological shifts in studies about Africa, in studies which ask that we should try to shift away from frameworks which look at predictability into people's lives. So here we are not particularly interested in causality, but we are interested also in what I think Shabal has written about the politics of suffering and smiling, and how people try to seek alternative ways, to make living and make ends meet, in the midst of uncertainty. And we would argue that mobile money and money transfer services, are used, to negotiate different forms of being and belonging within this specific context or so. So the ICT revolution and debates in the ICT revolution also influence our research. Across Africa, financial institutions now take advantage of mobile phone penetration to initiate electronic money transfer, mobile money platforms, especially amongst poorer people whose access to formal banking possibilities are limited. Many of these rural farmers do not have access to banking facilities because also of the structures and because of the formalities which are required by people, by these institutions to open bank accounts. As I mentioned earlier about my grandmother and also about these young men, in this association, they cannot open bank accounts because you need certain formal papers. So, in poor rural communities, the transformative effects of this initiative are particularly dramatic, where mobile phones represent the first modern telecommunications of any kind and the main access to urban and wider global world, especially in places without access to roads. So, where I grew up, I must mention that many in these poor rural communities, transportation and access, mobility is particularly impaired. So people need to seek a multiplicity of ways, to ensure that they keep connections and mobility. So mobile money and mobile funds provide people with this opportunity and this possibility, to negotiate these difficulties. So, but our interest, I'm just going to skip this quickly. Our interest is not so much on these on the advantages that these provide, but particularly on the kinds of practices that the introduction of these new mobile money initiatives, such as the mobile money, which was recently launched by the MTN, the ways in which they offer people the possibility to continue to practice these all kinds of relationships or these all kinds of activities such as Njangi groups also. I've been asked to stop, so I'm just going to try to stop that. But our particular interest then is to see these practices, meanings, and the impacts and acceptance of this, and the social uses, and the way it transforms people's everyday lives. So we are not just interested in the productivity and how it improves, produce and harvest for poor farmers, but particularly how they place it within their different cultural practices. Thank you.
Next we have Sean Dowdy.
Okay, well, like Divine, I also grew up on a farm, but my mother unfortunately still does not have a mobile phone. So, which has kept actually the post office and its inefficiencies as the symbol of our relationship. So first, just my gracious thanks to Bill, Ginny, and everyone at IMTFI for hosting this marvelous conference and for the generous patronage in actualizing all of these research projects. Before I begin, I would like to give you a brief overview of what my project for IMTFI entails. Basic knowledge of accounting has long been considered the key to prosperity, or a key to prosperity, whether one is managing a business or a household. Yet, in using accounting training as a key method of poverty alleviation, initiatives for financial inclusion have tended to obscure existing strategies as well as social, technological, and cultural infrastructures that populations in non-Western contexts mobilize for their own financial and social reckoning, things that at first blush may not appear economic in character at all. So my project researches such strategies and infrastructures by attending to the ways financial reckoning occurs at intersections between cosmology and economic life, between forces, as it were, of spiritual and material prosperity. I'm focusing on the logics, techniques, and technologies of accounting for cash and cashless transactions, for example, debts, gifts, barter, livestock trading, etc., employed by populations in the multi-ethnic kingdom of Mayong in rural Assam, this is in Northeast India. This research seeks to explore how the poor, in scare quotes, among culturally and politically marked minorities actually account, and what cosmologies attuned to economic conditions of scarcity, growth, moral sanctions, status hierarchies, and powerful non-human forces might entail with respect to practices of financial reckoning. Now, today, I want to focus more narrowly on a heuristic derived from local discourse in Mayong, something called the shared account. And so, to just bring you to where Mayong is in the world, Mayong is a fully functioning kingdom, actually, in the northeastern Indian state of Assam, embanked by the Brahmaputra River. It contains about 19 villages with a population of about 20,000 in total. Now, the Mayong kingdom operates parallel to state governance. Here, customary rule overrides the panchayat, creating a sort of non-state space within a state space. Moreover, Mayong is famous across Northeast India as a country of black magic. Indeed, a phenomenon of generalized sorcery. That is to say, where anyone could potentially harm or hurt you through invisible means, and this pervades daily life. And now to turn to the matter at hand. In the village of Bura Mayong, a so-called tribal area of the Mayong kingdom, home to 5 different scheduled tribes, as per the Indian constitution, one cannot get through a day without uttering, hearing, or observing the practice of hisab kore, or accounting. Now, the ubiquity of the hisab, or the account, however, implies neither its uniformity nor its unequivocal translatability into what we commonly understand as financial record keeping. And now I'm sure many of you who are here today from the subcontinent are familiar with the semiotic and pragmatic depth of hisab, its technological uniqueness, its conceptual role in both business and household life. But today I'm only interested in the ethnographic specificity of hisab in Mayong. That is to say, how we can elaborate the place of this accounting concept via the cosmologies and economics of this particular place. So in Mayong, hisab is not merely a financial techno-practice, but a phenomenal field of dynamic interaction, an ontography, we might say, following anthropologist Martin Holbrod. It covers myriad aspects of life as it is remembered, communicated, and managed. And there are 2 types of accounts, 2 types of hisab in Mayong. One is secretive, and the other is shared. And this distinction is very important for my talk today. But all over, both secretive and shared accounts rely on a transparency of other minds, something I'm calling a kind of telepathic ethics, where even secret accounts are mired by a general social audit. Others can manipulate your thoughts, your objects of value, your thoughts and actions, in essence, do not belong to you. This has a lot to do with the ubiquity of sorcery in Mayong, but also the political dynamics of the village context itself. Hisab kore also has a kind of historical context to it. People see it as a means for cultivating historical practice and imagination. I tend to call it history zero, and in the Homia language, it's goroka. And goroka is the pedal that you press when you're weaving on a loom. It's also the instep when you step on something. The movement of the foot up and down is called goroka. So there's a sense in which that is the beginning of history, kind of the mark of the footprint of a historical context. And so my general question here is, can the logics and practices of hisab be integrated into designs and initiatives for financial inclusion? And if so, how so? So I'm going to focus now on the shared account, homo bhagi hisab. This talk explores features of 2 kinds of shared accounts in village life. One cashless form of reckoning called adidiya, which literally means the giving of half or sharing 50-50. And one cash-based form of social reckoning referred to as the fine, fainto, and what their implications are for questions of prosperity, poverty, technology, and personhood. And the fine and adidiya, while fundamentally different in terms of their materialities, their histories, and ideological justifications, exist together in a mutual cosmoeconomic field. And these are some of what I'm calling a cosmoeconomic field, and this is the certain things that they share. They approximate what we might call a publicly audited account. In other words, villagers are all of the accounts are available to them to debate and to observe and ultimately audit, which creates a kind of village-wide transparency. And the mutual reckoning of these accounts is done in coincidence with the ritualization of life events. So during name ceremonies, during marriages, mortuary feasts, that's when accounting takes place with the shared account. Moreover, shared accounts are open and remain unbalanced for a long term. Fines are never paid off, so to speak, and adhi can get inordinately complex, and I'll talk about this more later. And when people talk about the way these accounts are mobilized, people say it as a strategy for development. The local concept is noyan. So they have an idea that this this practice actually can help them somehow develop. Now, while this account is publicly debated and audited, ultimately the authority of the balancing or the final reckoning is determined by kingly or chiefly authority. Now, Mayong is a diarchy. The anthropologists here eyebrows might raise on that, but there's a peace king and a war king. A war king is actually called a chief, but there are two kings of Mayong, and they share different authorities. Moreover, the shared account can be rendered or reckoned through the medium of a cash transfer, but money in any form is not needed as the medium of value for these accounting techniques. Finally, if books are kept at all, it's done on regular single entry bookkeeping. There's no double entry. It's very much like keeping a cash ledger. Now, the point of all this, though, is that the shared account is distinguished from the secret account, also called muni muni hisab, gupute hisab, which, although shared in the general sense that all accounts are kind of shared thoughts, I mean, Heraclitus made this point a long time ago, secret accounts are not publicly audited. Secret accounts are kept usually between a minimal number of participants and usually involve debts or transactions with sorcerers as well, beige. The secret accounts are considered to be a method of protecting one against assault sorcery or accusations of witchcraft as well. In fact, we might say that the secret account is an attempt to cultivate an anti-telepathic ethic. So if the shared account is available to other minds, the secret account is closed off from other minds. And I'm using this term anti-telepathic ethic from Melanesian anthropology, where Melanesian anthropologists are very interested in this ideology of the opacity of other minds, especially in Upramin and Korowai contexts. So here's some examples of the shared account undergoing people using shared accounting. And this is a fine context. Okay, so I'll turn now to method. Now, accounting, as we often think about it in its most broad terms, tends to be a method for managing, recording, and communicating all features of an economic whole. Money goes in, money goes out, debts and assets that accumulate or diminish, categorizations of exchanges that provide a picture of the very whole one is trying to manage. In terms of its overall purpose, we also tend to project a sense that accounting is, in the final analysis, about profitability, and that the work that goes into maintaining a book or ledger of accounts, i.e. how to hide and reveal money, how to communicate the state of economic things to interested parties, has a rather narrow application. Record reality and communicate it to vested interests. Now, this is a very Baconian ideology, and it does not map directly onto what we see happening in Mayong. In fact, there is a more puzzling anthropological problem in thinking about what accounting is here. And it turns, as I said before, on the shared account being this access point into others' motivations and intentions, into those dark spaces of interiority that drive suspicion and, conversely, social solidarity, the opposite of the secret account. Now, all this leads us to an interesting question of method. If to account in Mayong is decidedly to reckon, record, and communicate and manage the cosmos, we can call this a kind of cosmography. But it creates a problem for anthropologists, especially ones interested in financial inclusion. If cosmography is an account of the world in all of its spatio-temporal complexity, then what is our task for translating this account, for rendering it comparable and analyzable in the socioeconomic field we are accustomed to call accounting? How might we use this form of life to problematize our own understanding of the efficacy and indeed the ontology of accounting itself? Now, I'm using Moulton Holbrad's term of ontography to help me here. Because if ontography, which is this idea of analyzing a social phenomena in terms of how its difference thinks about difference differently, it's a kind of philosophical method. If this is about translating cultural practices and maintaining the productivity of disjunctive out-of-joint translations, then how could we ever, once we get a sense of the productive ambiguity of the notion of hisab or of the shared account, how can we ever put that into a conceptual dialogue with financial accounting itself? Now, this method is neither novel nor radical. It's classically anthropological. But unlike engaged or applied anthropology, which many of you belong to here, or even Immanuel Kant's anthropology from a pragmatic point of view, this kind of method is overcautious. It does not move beyond the question of what is to be done. Or it doesn't ask the question what is to be done. It looks very simply at what is it. and what is it in relation to, in comparison to what we think about accounting. So I don't have much time, but I wanted to go through just a little bit about what adidia and the fine are. Now, adidia is generally a practice of sharecropping and livestock circulation. I'm only going to focus on livestock circulation here. And what it refers to is not, when they call it giving a half or a 50-50 exchange, it doesn't refer to an amount, but to the fact that animals that circulate are female newborns, poili, and they are half of a mature animal. So if a household has a surplus of livestock, it is pressured to give the newborn females to a household of scarcity. And the problem is that it's assumed that when that female child grows up and gives birth, its offspring will be returned as adi, so the giver becomes the receiver and vice versa. Except that never happens, because the problem is every birth of an animal is an occasion for giving adi. So if you have a baby animal and you now have a surplus, you're sort of pressured to give that newborn animal to another household that has scarcity. So it's an almost endless deferral of returning the livestock to its original owner. Now, this creates an interesting question when it comes to accounting, because none of these accounts are written down. They're done from memory, and villagers endlessly argue about the origins of the livestock and where it came from and where it went to, but it's publicly debated is what I want to point out right now. Here's some examples of adi animals. I mean, practically every adi, whether it's used for milking, for cultivation, or for food, which also creates an issue with ducks, for example. Practically every animal in the village is a result of an adi transfer. So my attempt at translating what adi is, people refer to it as a barter exchange. They also refer to it as a sharing of equal parts. It's a kind of mutual or shared accounting, and more very interestingly, it's talked about in the analog of kinship. Adi partners, the giver and the receiver, are kinds of affinal brothers, and the exchange of adi animals is a kind of marriage. It's not balanced, it's not transvalued via cash, animated by love, compassion, honor, respect, all these kind of ideological terms. I'll skip this right here. Now, the fine is very similar to this, but the fine in Puramayong involves cash, and it's based on a penalty of breaking transgressions regarding marriage rules. And there's two ways of looking at this. One is for minor infractions. If you don't follow the proper rituals or rites, every time there is a naming ceremony, a marriage, or a mortuary feast following a death, you have to give 20 rupees to the collective pot. That money is then turned around and used for more feasting. Now, for major infractions against marriage rules like incest, which means patrilateral cross-cousin marriage in this context, or marrying outside of one's jati or ethnic community, taking marrying out too far, so to speak, the fine is rendered as 10 rupees and 1 pig to be slaughtered. And this happens until death. I mean, you don't stop giving. Every time there is a moment of life, a moment actually of prosperity in a cosmological sense, you have to pay this fine. It's a very normal thing. And here's some examples of, that did not turn out well. Here's some examples of how the fine is kept. These are all members of the St. Patrick clan, and this is a particular infractions of just not going through the proper rituals and rites to give a marriage. So it's 20 rupees for each person. So my attempt to translate this, well, it's almost identical to Adi, and involves, the only difference is it's accompanied by a lot of drinking, a lot of feasting and festivities, so much so that the fine centers around, can the feast happen or not, right? Now, I'll end here. So the shared account in Puramayong, are we dealing with something abstract like telepathic ethics? Are we dealing with something very pragmatic as just keeping history or managing finances? What is it, and what should we be done with it? And if the ontographic analysis of finding out what the shared account is goes very far in helping us to understand what it is in Mayong, can it either help or hinder programs designed for financial inclusion? I just want to end here on a very interesting point. When I was in the village, no one there uses mobile money technology. Now, I've got a mobile money account on my phone. and showed the villagers how to use it and if they had any interest in it. And immediately, the only thing that sparked their interest in what its value was and what its capacity for organizing their finances was its ability to share money, its ability to account for shared money, especially. People were concerned with, well, can these accounts, can I give my cross-cousin, my matrilateral cross-cousin, like, so many rupees, and how do I trace that, and how's it going to balance all this stuff? So there is a potential for compatibility here, but whether or not this could have any effect on poverty is an entirely different issue, and a troubling one considering that the external projects for development in Mayong have not been very successful. Indeed, between the cosmologics and economics of prosperity are the politics of kingship, the sociologics of sorcery, the complexity of accounting practices, the status negotiations of big men, etc. And I'll end here by saying that in such a complex cosmoeconomic field, the very difficulty for fueling prosperity is in fact often rendered in a paradoxical idiom, casually and almost daily uttered by my informants when they speak about economic life. And this term is moi dukia kintu na dukia. And this is an idiom that captures the delicate ambiguity of material wealth and personhood, in that dukia means both poor and sad. So there are 4 possible meanings. I am poor but not sad. I am sad but not poor. I am sad but not sad. And I am poor but not poor. So I'll leave it at that and leave this as an open question. So thank you.
So our final speaker will be Giancarlo Iatolino.
Gianluca.
Oh, Gianluca, sorry. Excuse me, Gianluca Iatolino. Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks for having me here. So I work on this research with Tom Maloney, but given the time available, I will be the only one speaking. So my interest was on the Somali diaspora in East Africa. I focus on flows of people, flows of money, particularly between Kenya and Uganda. I tackle also M-Pesa, which all of you know, which is like the bread and butter of people working in this field. And I look at particular use of M-Pesa, an interplay of M-Pesa with, let's say, traditional financial institutions. Now, over 20 years of statelessness, the Somali diaspora have developed a very efficient system to transfer money all across the world. And it's called Hawala. I will return to it later. But my research So in my research, I focus on the relation between financial infrastructures, livelihoods, and mobility. So there's a lot of studies on the impact of mobile telephony and financial institutions on livelihood. I thought that was very important to include also mobility in the pictures because Somali livelihood strategies are mainly based on mobility. With mobility, as I will show later, I mean mobility in physical space across borders, but also across categories. For instance, refugees and citizens, or mobility, which is derived from acquiring a foreign passport, and which is the main concern on which Bufis, what is called Somali longing for migrating abroad, is based. And I focused on a corridor, on the so-called Eastleigh-Kisenyi corridor. Now, Eastleigh is a neighborhood in Nairobi called also Mogadishu Kidogo, Little Mogadishu, which is an hub of the Somali diaspora in East Africa. Kisenyi is a neighborhood in Kampala, is near the Owino Market, between the Owino Market and the Gaddafi Mosque. It is a growing Mogadishu Kidogo, growing Little Mogadishu. In the last 5 or 6 years, the flows of people and money between these 2 points has grown for both local and regional factors. The first is the stabilization of Somalia, so that many people from Eastleigh or from all around the world have started traveling to Somalia, scouting for business opportunity. Now, the easiest place to go back to East Africa, including Kenya, from Somalia, is Uganda, because Uganda is the only place which accepts a Somali passport. And Uganda has a quite friendly refugee regime. So for many people, it's very easy to travel to Somalia and then go back to Kenya via Uganda. At the same time, there have been growing business opportunities in neighboring countries, particularly in South Sudan, on the border with DRC and down to Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, Zambia. This is mainly related to the availability of a crucial resource which drives Somali mobility strategies, which is hard currency, US dollars. So in last year, South Sudan has been a rich reserve of US dollars because of the presence of the international organization and oil companies. At the same time, the DRC Uganda borderland has always been a reserve of US dollars, particularly since last October. They started mining, Rand Gold, a mining company, started mining the Kibali gold mine, and then down to Rwanda and Burundi and Zambia. Recently, the route to South Sudan has been affected by the fact that last June, the South Sudanese Central Bank have decided to limit the provision of US dollars to commercial banks. So many Somali businessmen are pulling out of South Sudan because they're afraid to get stuck with South Sudanese sterlings. In this timeline, I try to illustrate the volatile times I went through, and also the subject of my research went through, because volatility affected not only the decision-making process of the subject of my investigation, but my own methodology. I started with the Somali presidential elections, which in a way marked the stabilization of Somalia, and then a spate of attack in Eastleigh between September and December 2012. Then the directive of the Kenyan government ordering refugees encampment, and then detention prior to the Kenyan general elections, and then to Westgate Mall attack in late September, going through the decision of the Kenya Supreme Court to allow Somali refugees in urban centers. At the same time, there have been some financial events following, for instance, the decision of the Kenyan government to repatriate or to send to the camps 1,000 Somali refugees in the city center. There have been a flight of Somali, both refugees and capital, out of Eastleigh. And then, very important, mid-May, Barclays UK announced a decision to close down 250 money transfer operators' accounts in Britain, including Dabshil, which is the main Hawala operator in the world. And this prompted a campaign to keep Hawala companies open. Now, the fear of Barclays were not really related probably to the Somali situation in particular, but the idea is that followed the decision to sanction HSBC for money laundering last year, when HSBC got a whopping fine for laundering Mexican cartels. Eventually, Barclays on the 5th of November, decided to postpone the closure of Dabshil of 1 year, so Dabshil was granted a reprieve. But of course, this also affected my very field work, because financial operators in the field in Eastleigh were very reluctant to disclose personal information, not to speak about the ledgers with me. And because particularly following the Westgate Mall attack, there was the awareness to be under scrutiny by the media, by the intelligence. So my work took some time, and of course it was only qualitative. I could not rely on data, on figures. But what I really tried to understand was which kind of factors play out in decision-making process when it comes to money, and to what extent mobile money had replaced traditional financial institutions, and how work the interplay of these two institutions. And then, of course, I realized that there were not just mobile money in Hawala, but the financial ecosystem was much more diverse. So I will start with the first Mogadishu Kidogo, Eastleigh. Here I just put a few keywords associated with this commercial hub northeast of the commercial district, Nairobi. Eastleigh as a terrorist hideout, Eastleigh as a money laundering spot, Eastleigh associated with refugees, but also with Kenyan Somalis. And these are all keywords which conjure up an idea of Eastleigh as a very multifaceted reality, which cannot be reduced only to a terrorist hideout. It's not just a place of refugees, because Eastleigh is a place where refugees, Somali diaspora from overseas, and Kenyan Somalis conflate. This also this awareness forced me to reconsider my initial idea to focus on refugees. And then I realized that was very difficult to understand if someone was a refugee, because maybe he didn't want to disclose his status with me, or he had purchased a Kenyan ID because of his contact. But at the same time, Eastleigh is also a place of the so-called low-end globalization, the terms that the anthropologist Gordon Matthews used to define this South-South network. Is a place very well connected to Dubai, to Hong Kong, to Guangzhou. And is a booming place, especially now they are refurbishing infrastructures. Kisenyi in Kampala is a small Mogadishu, is a small Eastleigh, is a place, it was a former slum where Somali refugees mix with students from Somalia enroll in the old university in Kampala. It's a place which thrives on remittances and different kind of business. It's one of the few places in Kampala where you can use M-Pesa. You have MTN in Uganda, but most Somalis use M-Pesa, which is used in roaming. So people have the opportunity to rent the phone shop owner M-Pesa wallet. And people can receive and send money directly at the phone shop. So here there are few words connected to Hawala. So Hawala is often seen through two main prisms, as a terrorism financing source, or as a lifeline. But then Hawala is much more complex than that. Hawala is a network of providers of banking services. You can open an account in Hawala. You can raise capital for investment. So you cannot just send money. And you can trade credit and debt from one side to another of the world. In the refugee, it's the only way to send money to and from Somalia. It's the only way to send money to and from refugee camps. So Hawala, the pro is that is multi-currency. You can trade whatever currency you want, although Hawala does prefer US dollars. You don't need ID for small Hawalas. There is a very informal know your customer policy. It's international. And you can trade virtually any amount of money with Hawala, unlike M-Pesa. It is cheap. During Ramadan, the percentage is like 1%, otherwise like 2%. The problem of Hawala is often under scrutiny. People have very well in mind the fate of Al-Barakat, which was closed down in 2001 by the State Department. And this is also one of the key of the success of Dabshil. Dabshil, the main Hawala company, is used by international organizations and big NGOs. So for many people it's very reliable, because it will be more difficult to close down Dabshil. Here there are a few words related to M-Pesa. It's safe, it's private. Private is a pro and a con. Depends if you ask to a woman, it's a pro. If you ask to an elder, it's a con, because if you cannot check in your wife's account, you don't know how women are going to spend their money, what they're going to do with their money. is flexible. For instance, M-Pesa have redefined the relation between urban centers and the refugee camps, so that many people had the opportunity to start a little business either in Kakuma or in Dadaab. At the same time, it allowed to trade small money. Small money is very important compared to big money, and then I will quickly explain why. An ID is required, which is often a problem for someone who doesn't want to disclose his identity. Then you can trade also Kenyan shillings, invulnerable to monitoring. So for some people mentioned that, especially when the Kenyan government ordered the encampment of the Somali refugees, some people were afraid that the Kenyan government could look into M-Pesa accounts and wonder, how can a refugee have all this money? And then there are some technical cultural barriers for seniors. So I individuated two main relations between Hawala and M-Pesa. There is a limited replacement. So M-Pesa largely replaced Hawala in internal transactions, so that some Hawala company has to offer like cash advance to have a competitive margin. At the same time, there is informal interoperability. You know, a very common problem with M-Pesa agents is that across Nairobi, across Kenya, is that sometimes they don't have a cash float. This never happened in Eastleigh, because if they run out of cash float, instead of borrowing money from the Kenyan Central Bank, they can simply rely on a loan, a quick loan from a relative who owns a Hawala company. And then we have to close down with this. This very fascinating ecosystem is the exchange market. Is the most fascinating place in Eastleigh. Fortunately, I was not allowed to take pictures. At one point, I was even kicked out because there was too many questions. But it's a place where Hawala agents interact with money vendors, with gold sellers, with M-Pesa agents, with investors, with wholesalers, and where there is profit is yielded to marginal gains, to transactions, exchanging currencies, exchanging different storage of value. And I have to close down with this, but then I'm open to question. Then, following the money, I realized that values are not only gendered, but are located on different temporal axes. So in a way, we can locate mobile money closer to women/students, because also students are not men, you know. They're like they're going to be men, but not really. A man is someone who hold like hard currency, who have livestock, who have large business, and a man is someone who have this kind of values, which are used to store value on a long term. And so I ran out of time, so I'm open for questions.
So I wanted to thank our panelists, Gianluca, Sean, and Divine, for three really interesting papers on I'll just make a couple of brief remarks on how things like technology, accounting practices, and financial networks can impact financial reckoning, financial practices. With that, I'll open up for questions, and I think the microphone is circulating. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mudita Tiwari, and I'm from IFMR Research. I had a question for Sean. Really liked the study that you did, and the presentation was great, so thank you. A question that we had collectively actually was, could you talk a little bit about the banking penetration in the area that you worked in? Because it seemed like most of the sort of financial networks and the financial transactions that were happening were informal. So sort of, if you could just shed some highlight about that. And another question was, you know, the barter of the animals, I believe it was Adi. That you said. How is it decided who gets the offspring? And is there like is there sort of a criteria for that? And how does that work? And if you observed anybody returning the favor back, did the transaction come to a completion ever? Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. I'll start with the first. Actually, my larger dissertation project is about the so-called informal economy in this area as well. I mean, I'm looking at kingship and sorcery in connection with informal economic logics and how this happens. But to answer your question about banking penetration, it's quite interesting. I mean, conceptually, Mayong is what Edwin Ardener would call a remote place. Not remote in the geotopographical or geophysical sense, but in the sense that a road wasn't built to there until 2006, which is about the time, just a little bit after that, that a State Bank of India branch was put there. Problem is, State Bank of India branch there, they built an ATM, it never works. The offices are only open for about 2 hours per day. The general sense of trying to get there and do business, people are so extremely frustrated with it. Some go to Guwahati, which is about 60 kilometers away, to do banking, but very few. Most of it is around the informal practice of debt and loaning in the village. And the secretive accounts that I alluded to are actually where most of that occurs. That's a very money-rich and sort of, a site for banking to accumulate. And its informal logics only are further emphasized in that regard. Of course, not like the rest of India, there are no sahukars, there's no money lenders to kind of, formalize the practice. It's done kinship-based. Which goes to your second question about barter and adhi. Who gets adhi? Who gets the offspring of the livestock? Generally kin first, but anyone who is a member of the village. The exception that everyone told me is strangers. You don't give adhi to strangers. So someone from a distant village you don't know, you don't give. And this goes into other logics they have about who counts as a stranger and who doesn't. In terms, did I ever see adhi being returned? No. People says it happens, but I've been there for 2 years, and I've always asking if anyone returns adhi, please let me know so I can see if there's anything associated with it. And it hasn't happened thus far, so thank you.
Thank you for your presentations. I'm Bridget Custon from Department of Anthropology at Johns Hopkins. Gianluca, I was fascinated by this Eastleigh exchange market with the Hawala agents, gold vendors, money agents, and apart from their interactions with customers, what are their interactions like with each other in terms of arbitrage opportunities, in terms of the temporal access that they see, in terms of how they may or may not be dealing with each other?
Yeah, this is absolutely fascinating because if you want to exchange money in Nairobi, the exchange market is the best place. If you receive money via Hawala, the Hawala Dar will tell you, look, I can give you this value for the money, but if you want to have Kenyan shillings, better to go to that money vendor. So you will sell the US dollars you get to the money vendor. We will sell the US dollar again to the Hawala Dar in exchange for Kenyan shillings. At the same time, the money vendor is related to the gold sellers. So the gold sellers are women, and they trade only Kenyan shillings. So at the end of the day, the gold sellers will put their gold and their Kenyan shillings into the safe of the money vendors. So the money vendors will always have Kenyan shillings to trade in exchange for dollars. At the same time, the Hawala Dar raise dollars from investors, from the wholesalers, and from other business. Also because Hawala Dar have always had a business on the side. So, and then you have also M-Pesa agents, which provide you with Kenyan shillings if you need to purchase gold or whatever. So I think that the logic of this ecosystem is to distribute risk across all the members of the system. And in a way, allow what I individuate as the key to understand the logic of this transaction, to allow to cultivate multiplicity of currencies, multiplicity of storages of values, multiplicity of infrastructures and monetary circuits.
Just a quick follow-up. Thanks. This is amazing. In terms of the risk that's being distributed, could you comment on how formal banking, corporate banks are they operating in some kind of capacity at the periphery of this? Did you witness any banks looking to get into this market to somehow capitalize on risk? I mean, is there a way in which the risk itself has become an object for speculation, for exchange? Like, is there? I mean, this is a classic approach of certain, corporate funds in the West, to make money off precisely this kind of risk.
Actually, what are very interesting are different narratives of risk, because, of course, most people will tell you that predicting risk or anticipating risk in details is a haram, because the will of God is unpredictable by nature. So in a way, risk is something to accept, something to incorporate. At the same time, I think that the cultivation of multiplicity is a way to weather risk, which include also formal banking system. So many people at the beginning will tell you that they rely mainly on Hawala, that banks are not part of the Somali culture. Then, as soon as they have opportunity, they will open a bank account, but they will keep it dormant, because a bank account is related to money, to having really good, a large amount of money. And you see, when you really have money, it entails that you also have relatives asking for money. So many people will tell you, if I really have money, I will use my formal bank account, because it's located outside the Somali community. So each time I have to withdraw money, I don't have people seeing me going to the Hawala and getting cash. So also, a formal bank account is something people contemplate, which doesn't mean that they will stop using Hawala. It doesn't mean they will stop using M-Pesa. It's something to use on the side. It's a part of this repertoire of financial infrastructure that people use, because, as I say, you never know what can happen tomorrow. So it's better to have multiple routes.
Thanks. This was a great panel, and I have a question that maybe all three of you can say something about. But so in Divine's presentation, the category I'm thinking about is youth, and then in Sean we have kinship relationships, and in Gianluca's presentation, youth and also gender. But I'm wondering about the relationship between accounting practices and the use of mobile money and exclusion. Is it ever a kind of, the networked factor of accounting and using mobile money in certain kinds of exchanges create more of an exclusion than you expected to find?
Thank you for your question. I would say that mobile money creates gated communities. It creates a new gated community. And it's interesting to hear the other presentations in the sense that the emphasis on informality and formality is particularly interesting. Because if a practice, for example, is regular and legitimated by a community, on what basis do you identify it as informal? So these new practices, mobile money in particular, creates these gated communities. That's what I would argue it excludes rather than include.
You mind if I follow up?
Sure.
That's an excellent point too, because we are using, to go on your point about formality and informality, those are very economistic terms. I'm not, harping on the economists in the room, but I don't think an anthropologist would find them very useful anymore. Pache Keith Hart. Still, the question of exclusion and mobile money, the only intimation I have is that on the contrary, mobile money seems to be a potential for further inclusion. But inclusion means what in this sense? Inclusion of, the question of will it be more inclusive in financial terms? I'm not so sure, but definitely in terms of building the kind of, and maintaining and maybe even reinforcing the kind of kinship solidarity, the kind of community solidarity that people want. They want more means to share. They want more avenues to audit each other, and to keep that in place. So that would be my speculation.
I agree with Sean's points that the distinction, the dichotomy between formal and informal is an analytical distinction that is not very, sometimes it's not very useful in the empirical realm. What I see is that sometimes mobile money was excluded on purpose. I mean, the decision was to exclude mobile money when it comes, for instance, to rotating saving and credit associations. So many women involved, for instance, in the camel milk trade, used mobile money to get money from their from Uganda, from other place where after they sold the camel milk. But then when it comes to actual meetings, they prefer to pool the money in person, because the meeting of this rotating saving credit association was also opportunity for single mothers, for other marginalized categories to get together. Also because in a place like Eastleigh, you don't have many spaces for single women to hang out. So at least they could meet to pull the money together, and they could forge business partnerships, and they could share informations and other things. And then money is still a form of is still an object around which identities are created. I was thinking, for instance, at exchange markets, there was this tribes of money vendors. And they were proud, for instance, of the way they could handle money. They could count cash. I was not allowed to film, but I learned how to do so. I can do it on request. But you put the money. And they show me the way they count, which is very different from the Kenyan way of counting money. And they were very proud of the fact that they could count money and do different things at the same time. Which I'm not sure, because then I saw the owner of the shop complaining with one of the money vendors about the ledger, so probably it was not very reliable. But still, handling money is something which creates a sort of community, an identity.
Thanks very much. My name's Tom Maloney from the Centre for African Studies, University of Edinburgh. Ria, again, like Eric, I really, really enjoyed that panel, so thanks to all of you. The question's to Gianluca, and it's partly been asked, but I know it's something you've been thinking about. We've not had a chance yet to discuss this, so I'll put you on the spot. It's a slightly broader question to the one here about, I guess, possible replications, but it's what are the possible evolutions of the Somali financial ecosystems?
Well, now there's a lot of interest towards the, especially Somali remittances. There are many companies which are developing platforms to trade bitcoins, which can be a possible evolution. In my view, for instance, a bitcoin can be very useful in the hands of not end users, but if integrated within Hawala pre-existing infrastructures. I will think that even if M-Pesa gets the 100% penetration, Hawala will be kept on the side, because it's a system which so far has proved resilient and reliable enough to weather crisis and whatever. So I think that the more financial instruments will be available, the more this financial repertoire will grow. It's possible that Bitcoin or other form of digital currencies will be taken seriously into consideration by particularly Hawala Dar, by Hawala companies, by Somali financial institutions.
Thank you very much. My name is Muya from Zambia. I have a question for Mr. Divine. I took the comment that you gave about the Jangi groups, which is quite popular for using the system of social facilitation, of pulling together financial prosperity. And I was just wondering how this classical strategy of enhancing the prosperity of communities might be a preferred alternative compared to the introduction of mobile money facilities and ICT. I just wanted you to comment about the emerging themes of what might be happening between the social networking, classical strategy compared to the modern introduction of mobile money and ICT. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think the introduction of mobile money does not exclude the continuity of Njangi groups. The question is how Njangi groups then integrate this, in their everyday practices and in their relationships, and how they then deal with a whole host of other things which are framed by face-to-face relations, because now you have risk, for example, which is shared, through digital technologies. You have certain negotiations which are done through digital technologies. Traditional Njangi groups necessitated that people should meet in a physical space and a physical place, where the things traded are not just money, but people have to bank on different sets of relationships. It also meant that despite the difficulties of mobility, people sought a specific time in the week or month where they would meet in this geographical place in order to meet, to build different sorts of things. But currently, the introduction of mobile money, it also means that there are different kinds of flexibilities. It also means that people have to then begin to change. From my research, these physical presence, for a certain virtual presence and then physical absence. So I'm particularly interested in how they then deal, with all of these activities, such as sharing food, for example, sharing drinks, paying for fines, in the absence of these things. But from research, we see that people pay fines, for example. People make contributions through mobile money, through exchange. There's a bank account where everybody has to deposit money. And we are interested in things like risk, for example. What happens then when money is not deposited? But the introduction of e-money doesn't mean the exclusion of Njangis. Njangis continue in that.
Thank you. My name is Cyrus from Karatina University, Kenya. Mine is directed to Gianluca. Now, could you comment on the cross-border usage of Airtel Money and Orange Money? Because apart from M-Pesa, we have Airtel Money, which also is in Uganda, and Orange Money, Kenya and Uganda. Thank you.
Well, I noticed that among Somalis, M-Pesa is really dominant. MTN is used by Somali students in Kampala for M-Pesa, or Airtel use it for local transactions. But when it comes to transborder transaction, people use M-Pesa also because Safaricom has an agreement with MTN to share the network. So they use M-Pesa because so they can rent the M-Pesa wallet of the agents. So the agents advance cash, and then when they cross the border, they can cash in M-Pesa, the money they have in their M-Pesa account. But to be honest, I haven't noticed usage of other mobile money, other kind of mobile money. Also in Eastleigh, I think the overwhelming majority are M-Pesa shops. There are also some, of course, they sell also Orange airtime or Airtel, but I don't see much of other companies used by Somalis. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mike Burton, anthropology here at UCI. This session had a lot of talk about family, community sharing, and accounting, and the morality of accounting, and I wanted to ask any or all of you about what's the role of gender or male-female relationships in this. For example, do men and women have different concepts of morality, of paying back or giving? Do the exchange networks involving animals, are those gendered? Are the animals gendered, with some being male and female? And also, what role, if any, say, would women play in Somali international networks, that kind of thing? So if any or all of you can say something about that, that would be nice.
Start. Yeah, in that scheme that I showed, I tried to locate different assets and different kind of business, either close to man or women access. And what I noticed is that some activities are considered in the women's realm mainly to preserve a sort of autonomy of women. So when it comes to, for instance, cross-border transaction, it comes to my mind gold as the main issue, which the main asset which is used by women. For instance, when they flew from Somalia, gold is something that that is wearable and can become at the same time a storage of value or an asset that you can use for dowries, bride wealth. So gold is something specific for women, while the equivalent of gold can be livestock for men. In a way, also livestock is a sort of asset which can cross border. You can move it, and I think that what has really value for a Somali is something which allows you to move and to cross borders and boundaries. This is why livestock for men, art currencies for men, and gold for women are considered the most important resources.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. With regard to the local gender ideologies in Mayong, first, who accounts? Well, men, women, deities, ancestors, practically any entity you could imagine. There are stories of gods holding their own accounts and holding people accountable for their gifts, as it were. I have some excellent ethnographic instances of the goddess demanding that an account be settled, and people playing tricks on the goddess to keep the account open. But who dictates the morality of accounts? This is essentially for high-ranked men. As I said, for example, in the system where they pay fines, men will get hammered. They will get very drunk and argue explicitly, but their arguments are about the proper morality of keeping these rights. The word is niyom they use. In Hindi, niyom can mean anything like a rule, but in Assamese it means something like a tradition, a rule, a proper way of doing things. And that, they control the question of morality. But women, on the other hand, are in charge of rituals of prosperity. So while that is going on, in another room, in another context, women will be doing nam. They will be performing certain rituals, actually undergoing oracular divination in connection with local goddesses, and ensuring that the prosperity of that life event, the accounting and the prosperity that it should create, is unfolding. In regards to the animals, this is interesting. It's only female newborns that are given for exchange, because it's the idea that if you give a male newborn, there's no, it may impregnate other females, but you need to have something to give birth to more animals in order for the cycle to continue.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's, as you've mentioned, it's a very important question. I think I will first state that I want to reduce gender mainly to women. I think that's problematic because if you look across, actually in the Cameroon grassfields, where the economic crisis tended to shift the economy, to women following the collapse of the civil service, and other industries, men then became the problem of gender then became facing men, not women here. So I wouldn't just reduce that to women. But I would say that each of these Njangi groups and associations are framed by specific membership. For men, I think risk and also paying fine is completely different than for women also. There are many Njangi groups for women which are constituted around farming, for example, shared farming, around weeding, and sometimes around paying for school fees. For I know other Njangi groups for men which are constituted around construction, building houses, or buying cars. And for young people, they have Njangi groups constituted around fashion or other stuff. So it's shaped by that membership. And I think gender is not enough. You would have to add other things, such as professional association or specific problems at that lifetime or neighborhood or so. So it's dependent on specific context and not just gender.
Milind Sathe is my name. I am from Australia. I have a question on to Gianluca about the Hawala. Now, on one hand, the formal financial institutions are pressing or pushing for a crackdown on Hawala because the Hawala is efficient and lesser cost system. So the financial institutions are up in arms against it. The anti-money laundering legislations, how much they are effective in Somalia and the other countries that you have mentioned, Uganda and Kenya, in controlling Hawala, and how does that impact on the issue of, as you mentioned, about financial inclusion through Hawala?
Well, the Hawala companies, particularly the ones which work with UN agencies or big NGOs, stress they have a very, very strict know your customer policy. To be honest, I'm quite skeptical of this. So in a way, I will answer that you cannot track money once they send via Hawala. At the same time, many people will tell you that this is the good of Hawala, that you cannot track money. I mean, the assumption of money laundering is that you wash dirty money and you have it white. Hawala allow you to turn red cloth green or yellow. Hawala is a washing machine where money can be used for whatever, where all the boundaries between licit and illicit, formal and informal, disappear. So this is the good of Hawala. Hawala allows to turn aid money into business money. On the same time, I think that targeting these big companies will create a proliferation of smaller Hawala companies. Now, Hawala is a set of practices. Hawala can be made also by two people related with each other, one in Britain and the other in Kenya, trading credit and debts. So even if Dabshil closed down under the pressure of Western regulators, you cannot stop Hawala. So I think that before discussing money laundering and terrorist financing with Somali operators, it's necessary to redefine the terms of the issue, because some concepts such as money laundering or aid embezzlement can be quite equivocal. So it would be better to say it first and discuss what they really mean.
So I have two questions, one for Sean and the other for Divine. Sean, starting with you, I'm an economist, and so when I listened to your presentation, the set of institutions that you presented reminded me very strongly to a risk-sharing network based on informal insurance. So it was sort of interesting that I didn't hear that word from you. So I wonder if you could explain to what extent you think that this is insurance versus not insurance, But if it is insurance, one of the things that we should expect to see is that when I give a gift to somebody as an insurance mechanism, I shouldn't expect the gift to be returned. I would expect instead somebody else in the community to give me a gift later on when I'm in trouble. So this aspect of reciprocity that you don't find, I don't find it too surprising. So for Divine, thank you for your presentation. I found this Njangi institution to be very interesting. Initially, I thought this was sort of like a formal network, friendship network, friends who come together. But then you mentioned how it's also a mutual assistance type of network where people save, give loans to one another. I guess I'm interested to hear more about whether the Njangi system, is it more of a based on, is it more of a mutual assistance program that then develops into friendship or relationships, or is it the other way around, or if it's very heterogeneous and some groups are really composed of people that are not necessarily friendly to one another, but they value the financial aspect of it, or the other way around? Thanks.
Thank you for that question. It's actually a very important one because while there is a general ideology of reciprocity, people will say, for example, in the livestock exchange in Adidia, they will say, it is certain that the animal will return, that offspring will return to the original owner. In that sense, it's not very much unlike the Maori spirit of the gift, the classic anthropological idea of the gift that will return to its giver. Problem is though, when you look at it, at the actual functioning of this institution, this system, this practice, whatever you want to call it, is that reciprocity is never sort of expected. It should, ideally it should, but it doesn't seem to be that way. And to use the analog term of insurance, well, it's an interesting idea, but ethnographically opaque for them. One, there is no such thing as insurance in the community, whether that exists in a system of buying insurance. Even the term insurance, in fact, I don't know what it would translate to in Nahomia, I would have to look it up. But the model that they exchange on, while it may be rooted in an ethic of long-term reciprocity, it's not, the function is not to do that. The pragmatics of it is to keep the account open, right? And it's also to build status. For example, if you acquire a new surplus of livestock, you're sort of pressured to give that away. You're not pressured to return it. You're pressured to send it back to somebody else. And there's not a sense that it should ever come back to you. There's not an expectation of that either. It's just an expectation to keep the gift in play, you might say. So this is actually, we might even say, a different genre of gifting, different from our usual sort of expectation of it. But thank you.
Thank you for your question. I don't know whether to call it relating to what you said. I think both they're similar. I don't know whether it's an epistemological question or it's an issue of worldviews, because also insurance in this context really doesn't exist here. And these Njangi groups are constituted on the basis of mutual, of familiarity in friendship. And Njangi groups should grow out of friendship, because it is this friendship that ensures honesty and trust, and it is this trust that also ensures that there's interdependency, there's money, there's risks. And then I trust that tomorrow, when I give you $100 today, next week you're going to bring $100, which means conflicts are resolved within these groups, and they're not taken to police or to courts of law and others. So they're founded on these friendships. Friendships grow to Njangi groups. But currently, with mobile money and also this face-to-face relationship now moving and virtual participation, it means that these friendships and these bases, foundations of trust then disappear, which then redefine, groups. So now we have groups with people who might not even know each other, but which also means that risk, there are different forms of risk and different kinds of shared risk there.
to a really wonderful start. I mean, this is the sort of thing that in the two panels this morning, I think that you really only find through IMTFI, the kind of unique bringing together of perspective and empirical material, and the sort of work that really is stretching both the analytical and the practical imagination. So I want to thank all of our presenters this morning for really just getting off on a terrific foot.